I'm pleased to have the chance to be at one of Jane Orient's meetings. What about this?
Don't worry about that.
Okay. And I propose to give an informal update on a review of the ballistic missile defense situation and the proliferation of missiles and weapons of mass destruction of a year ago. And the first thing that one can say is there is one bright note. The main defense against theater ballistic missiles, regional ballistic missile attacks, in the current U.S. plans is the Army's THAAD, an acronym for an interceptor of quite high capability, high altitude intercepts, which has, however, unfortunately, been plagued by failures. It has failed 3 out of the last 3 tests and is potentially in disarray. A 4th test is planned, and we all have our fingers crossed. But this record of failure on the leading U.S. candidate for deploying this technology has damaged the credibility of these projects. The New York Times and others hostile to the concept of missile defense for a variety of reasons. The New York Times ran an article a while ago in that connection saying it's 14 years and $40 billion after President Reagan's SDI speech, and ballistic missile defense still doesn't work. But the Israelis have shown that this is false. They have a counterpart to the THAAD called the Arrow. Doesn't make quite as high an altitude intercept, but it's good enough for their regional purposes. And whereas THAAD is a hit-to-kill interceptor, supposed to be, the Arrow is designed only to get close to the target missile and then blow up, killing the bird by shrapnel. But in its last 2 tests, Arrow succeeded not only in getting close to the interceptor, but in actually hitting it dead on, proving thereby that a hit-to-kill interceptor can be made to work. That's the good news. Now for the rest of the story. I have focused in the presentation on this occasion on the Chinese threat and some developments in Russia that warrant comment. The Chinese have close to deployment, in initial test phase, and a plan for deployment beginning in the year 2000, 3 years from now, a missile called the DF-31, which is solid fueled. It means the launch is reliable, has a 5,000-mile range, which means it can reach the western third of the United States, including most of California. Will be ready for deployment according to their development schedule in 3 years. We'll have a mobile launcher. That's a new development that didn't exist a year ago. They have succeeded in obtaining from the Russians, or from the, it may be from the former Russian Republic of Belarus, I'm not sure, the SS-25 mobile launcher, which they are reverse engineering, according to reports, to press it into use as a mobile launcher for the DF-31. That's bad news for us because a mobile launch platform makes the missile very hard to detect and knock out, as we found in the Gulf War. And the DF-31, the Chinese in the development program are focusing on penetration aids, in particular on decoys. And decoys are a serious problem for our present defense plans, because if the warhead is decoyed, it can't be intercepted until the altitude is 100 kilometers or less. Below that altitude, the density of the air is great enough so that it retards the decoys, which are relatively lightweight, retards the decoys relative to the warhead. So the bird leading the flock is the warhead, and then the instructions can be sent to the interceptor to zero in on that leading bird. So, but that can only be done when you have, when the attacking missile has reached an altitude of no more than 100 kilometers. Now, at that point, the interceptor is committed, its track is defined, it goes after that bird, but it takes it a while to rise up toward it. And when you work out the numerics, it turns out that while the commitment is made at 100 kilometers or lower, the intercept altitude is 35 kilometers or lower, because as the interceptor rises towards the bird descends towards its target on the ground. Now, 35 kilometers is a very great problem, because at that low altitude, the air is so dense that it is extremely easy to make the warhead maneuverable. You stick out a vein, a metallic vein, to one side. It can just be held there on a spring hinge with tied to the body of the missile by a rubber band or whatever, and then you just break that tie and the vein pops out, and the warhead and missile, if still attached, go into an erratic, wobbly corkscrew that evades the interceptor. Saddam's Scuds during the Gulf War were cobbled together out of regulation Scuds to give them longer range. The fuel tank was extended, and the workmanship was not very good, and they tended to break up on re-entry. And that made it very difficult for the Patriot, in fact almost impossible for the Patriot interceptors to intercept them, although they otherwise would have been easy prey for the Patriot. So one has in a decoy threat, the seeds of a situation that make it extremely difficult to intercept. And THAAD and Patriot, even if THAAD's development program is continued and successful, as we hope, even if effective against single warheads, will almost certainly fail to defend against a decoy Chinese attack, which is a very serious matter, since plans call for using the Patriot and or THAAD defense for the protection of our Asian allies, mainly Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, from Chinese missile attacks. And then closely related to the decoy problem is that of cluster munitions. Even worse from the viewpoint of our defense, a subdivision of the warhead into 50 to 100 small submunitions, each one filled, let us say, with anthrax or nerve gas, deadly. You have the defending missile, defending interceptor, is confronted with a choice among 50 equally potent and lethal sub-munitions, and the defense inventory is quickly exhausted and ineffective. By the way, a warhead composed largely of anthrax is just as much a weapon of mass destruction as a nuclear warhead. The lethality is about the same. It numbers, according to estimates, in the hundreds of thousands in an urban impact point. The only counter, and SDI learned this in years of study and calculation, the only counter to cluster munitions and decoys is a boost phase intercept, which means you catch them early in the boost phase while the rocket motors on the attacking missile are still burning, still sending it up from the ground. And at that stage, it is not possible yet to deploy the decoys or the submunitions, and so one has the bird with all its, well, I managed to unmix this metaphor. You have the bird with all its eggs in one basket. That is, let me see, I'm distracted by that anti-pun. The boost phase intercept, yes, but and SDI concluded the boost phase intercept was the only way to go, and of course the best way of doing that is by interceptors launched from space, Lowell Wood's brilliant pebbles. But the administration has seemingly taken pains to ensure that we and our allies do not have this protection. I recall an interview with William Perry at the time Secretary of Defense, in which he said, I'm closely paraphrasing, oh yes, space-based defenses, we got rid of them early, he said, with evident satisfaction. The administration is expanding, or hoping to expand, the ABM treaty, if it can either do an end run around the Congress or get Congress to agree. Right now it's focusing on the end run. But it has proposed to expand the ABM treaty in agreement with the Soviets, who are, by the way, delighted to cripple our security in this way. Expand the ABM treaty by outlawing space defenses, which could swoop down quickly on a missile launched anywhere in the world and catch it in the boost phase, by limiting the velocity of the intercepting missile. At the moment, the limitation is, for interceptors like THAAD, less than 3 kilometers per second, which, as I showed last year, is too small a velocity to get to the attacking missile and destroy it in the boost phase. And third, by outlawing space tracking, which means using sensors on satellites looking down to detect the launch of the attacking rocket as soon as that launch occurs, and to track it in its initial trajectory so as to determine its point of impact. We are not allowed to do that, according to these proposals, and we can go by a circuitous route. We can use space sensors to alert a radar on the ground. This is all on the hypothesis that to do otherwise would be non-compliant with the ABM treaty. We're allowed to use space sensors to alert a radar on the ground as to which direction to look, speaking loosely, and relay the information to that radar, and the radar then acquires the track. And that, of course, is too slow and delayed a reaction to give you the capability for a boost phase intercept. Well, the administration says not to worry. In the next 15 years, no nation except the established nuclear powers will be able to launch an ICBM attack on the continental United States. This is a false statement. Of course, it offers up Alaska and Hawaii as sacrificial elements of our nation. But even apart from the question of Alaska and Hawaii, the western United States will be within range in 3 years of updated mobile Chinese ICBMs, not easily interdicted, that could easily defeat the limited national U.S. missile defenses we now have under development. I hope the import of this may be sinking in. We are terribly vulnerable. We in this room, as well as everyone else in the nation, but the West Coast a little early, and Alaska a little earlier than the others, and Hawaii. And considering the vigor that China is displaying in its missile and military buildup, the 5,000-mile range of the DF-31, which nominally leaves protected still the eastern two-thirds of the country, that range will surely be extended in a few more years to cover the whole United States. In fact, a successor to the DF-31, the DF-41, with a range of approximately 8,000 miles, is already under development, with deployment scheduled to start in 2005, which is only 8 years away. I would like to pass now to the Russian threat, which we didn't talk about very much earlier, and which there have been some fairly recent developments. One might say, what Russian threat? The Cold War is over. Well, bear with me and I will try to correct that impression. Russia has modified its military doctrine to shift not away from reliance on nuclear weapons, but toward increasing reliance on nuclear weapons. Apparently this is a Russian High Command initiative taken in response to the rapid disintegration of Russia's conventional forces. and their perceived weakness and true weakness in that respect. What is the evidence for this statement? First, Russia has abandoned its no first use pledge publicly. The no first use pledge says, we will not be the first to use nuclear weapons in a conflict. We may be the second, but not the first. It has governed relationships in the Cold War up to this point. First use, according to a high Soviet military official, Russian military official, first use is morally acceptable and will be used without hesitation if we perceive ourselves to be in danger. And this was announced publicly, by the way, on May 9th of this year at a Moscow parade celebrating the victory over Nazi Germany. Second, the Russian command has gone to a launch on warning posture. That means launch a retaliatory second strike when evidence has been acquired of an attack on Russia, a missile attack on Russia, without waiting for confirmation of that evidence, either by the landing of the missiles or by intermediate tracking information. You might say, well, if they, why should they wait till they land on their country before launching a retaliatory attack? Well, in the absence of missile defenses, it doesn't really matter whether they wait or not. It isn't that they're giving up something by not waiting. But to launch on warning is a procedure fraught with danger. And to realize how scary this is. Oh, and one other thing, another bit of numbers I wanted to give you. The Russian procedures, and I'm taking this information from testimony before a House Congressional Committee. The Russian procedures under the launch on warning posture allow 3 to 4 minutes for detecting the missile attack and another 3 to 4 minutes for a decision by the top level command on whether to unleash their nuclear arsenal against the United States. To realize how scary this is, I started to say, remember that in January 1995, now you may not remember this because no one has said it to you, as I will comment a little further on in a moment. It hasn't been much noted, certainly not by the administration. But in January 1995, a Norwegian weather rocket, through what was called a communications glitch, triggered a Russian major launch on warning alert, leading to a high-level conference involving Yeltsin and the National Command, and to the activation of the famous nuclear football. Yeltsin himself later said they were minutes away, this gives one goosebumps, they were minutes away from a presidential decision to launch a massive nuclear attack on the United States. Now that was revealed by Yeltsin to his own people. President Clinton, who was on network TV the following day, said absolutely nothing about this terrifying incident to the American people. And he continues to insist that his administration has removed, in the post-Cold War era, removed the specter of Russian nuclear weapons aimed at the United States, in defiance of the facts, as I will explain in a moment. Now, just to add to that previous instance, in fact, according to this testimony, no less than 4 times in the 1990s, Russia went on a high-level nuclear alert and came close to attacking the United States with nuclear missiles. It's, well, again, let us save our response for later. Let me go on to give you a little bit more information on the disintegration of the Russian nuclear command and control apparatus. This shift towards reliance on nuclear weapons as the first rather than the last resort is scary enough in itself, but even worse against the background of the following facts taken from an article in a Russian paper, Komsomolskaya. I may have left out a syllable to Pravda is the second part of the paper's name. by a Russian colonel, Baikov, retired from the Strategic Rocket Forces, who wrote this article revealing problems in missile command and control centers. One officer on duty in the Launch Command Post, in this connection, he said, was close to madness and had to be hospitalized. In another instance, a, quotes, smart aleck, close quotes, officer figured out how to rewire the launch circuits so as to bring the operative pair of wires into contact and launch a missile without receiving the launch command from his superiors. In another case, according to John Stewart, a former DOE official who monitored command and control of Russian nuclear weapons in the Department of Energy, in another case, a battery of nuclear-armed SS-25s was found completely deserted on the highway because the officers and guards had gone foraging for food. Colonel Baikov concludes, quotes, "We, that is the Russians, Russia, could launch an accidental missile strike on the United States in seconds," close quotes. And he adds that poorly treated, unpaid, strategic rocket officers are, quotes, "psychologically weary and potentially dangerous," close quotes. He notes, and I found this, I mean, well, it's hard to say what is more chilling here, but equally chilling. He notes that the nuclear suitcases, the footballs, which are used for transmitting launch codes to the field, to the missile launch stations from the top command, are now operating 4 years beyond their nominal 10-year lifetime, while, quotes, "funding constraints have driven out most of the scientists who built and understood that nuclear football system, making repairs, let alone proper functioning, which would be our concern, making repairs problematical," close quotes, exclamation point. He's also said that parts of the command and control system have in the past undergone a spontaneous transmission into, and this is a quote, into combat mode. And one last note. Although the Cold War is supposedly over, and we are building down our nuclear weapons stockpile with great vigor, in fact, the Russians are actively modernizing their nuclear forces. They have started to replace the SS-25 with a new Topol-M. They have started to deploy, or are about to, a new version of their nuclear missile submarines, the Typhoon, version called the Boreas, starting in the year 2002. They have test-launched no less than 26 ICBMs in the last 6 years. This does not, and it is interesting also that in this time of terribly scarce resources for the Russians and the FSU, the Russians are spending billions of dollars on continuing highly expensive preparations for a nuclear war, including a subway going direct to Yeltsin's house and a large underground command post in the Urals. Now my last topic. I promised to come back against this background to the question of the supposed safety we enjoy in this country now from danger of Soviet nuclear attack. The famous issue of the retargeting agreement made between Yeltsin and Clinton, between those governments, according to which Soviet ICBMs are no longer targeted on the U.S., but presumably are targeted on the middle of the ocean or whatever. President Clinton and his team, the Defense Secretary and so on, have said approximately 150 times in the last 3 years that Soviet nuclear missiles are no longer targeted on the U.S. In one recent statement, President Clinton said, quotes, "For the first time since the nuclear age, there is not a single nuclear missile pointed at an American child today. Not one, not one, not a single one. Close quotes. What are the facts on this? First of all, there is no verification in the retargeting agreement. It may or may not be so. We have no idea what the Russians have actually done. If we said we did it, I suspect we've done it, because otherwise somebody in the press will find out. But not on that side. But second, it doesn't matter whether we have verification or not, because even if the Russian missiles have been retargeted, they can be targeted back on the United States in 10 seconds. The aiming information, the information for the aim points, is stored in the Missile Command Post computer, and it can be read back in that amount of time. The bottom line to this is that these statements by the administration are misleading the American people. The retargeting agreement is a meaningless ploy, just a bit of demagoguery. Or so it would seem according to these facts. Now, last time I prepared material to speak at one of Jane's conferences, I fell into the pit of despair with the facts I had to reveal. That was bad enough, the accounts of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The developments in Russia suggest the possibility, again quoting from congressional testimony, of, quotes, a catastrophic failure of Russian nuclear command and control, close quotes. And when you place that technical evaluation against the background of the disintegration of the Soviet economy, the failure of the government to pay some of the strategic rocket force officers as much as 3 months arrears, the possibility of someone with a screw loose finding himself in the command post alone. By the way, because of funding constraints, there are now normally, according to Colonel Bykov, only 2 or 3 Soviet officers on duty in these command posts and control posts. And now and then, Bykov comments, one of them has to go to the bathroom. So that leaves only one, and if that one is a psychopath, it's all over. I don't know what to say in conclusion about this, except that we've talked before about problems such as the vulnerability of our allies, but now it is the vulnerability of the whole United States that is at stake in these flawed arrangements. Thank you very much. If Dr. Orient would like me to, I can stay for a few questions. Jane, is that the plan?
Deterrence?
Oh, please go ahead.
Is deterrence still active in the United States? If you did have this psychopath alone there, it would not make too much difference. But assuming that doesn't happen, is the United States prepared enough to act now, as it was to keep Saddam from releasing his biochemical warfare?
I guess your question is intended to ask, do the Russians believe that if they attacked us we would retaliate?
Yes.
And I think that a rational individual like Yeltsin probably factors this in with heavy weight to his calculations. But I'm concerned about, first, electronic and computing and technical failure in the arrangements for safeguarding the command and control system, and second, the possibility of a very resentful Soviet officer deciding to sacrifice all for the glory of his mother nation. So I don't think that deterrence offers us too much contact in this environment. But you may disagree, and we can talk about that later. Yes?
I read that approximately 5 years ago the Russians had closed their plant for making tritium fuses for hydrogen bombs. Is this the case, or was that just a...
I'm not informed on that matter, but I have never come across that statement, but I can, if you can come and talk with me later, we'll try to find out.
I think the situation certainly looks grimmer and grimmer, and you probably are aware that our nation's civil defense program has pretty much been terminated altogether, and the minimal equipment they have is now being dispersed or thrown away or possibly sent to a landfill. But you know what, it used to be that even 3 or 4 years ago, we used to read about these possibilities in magazines such as National Review. And I just don't see very much about it lately. Do you have any explanation for that, or is there anything we can do about it?
I think it runs counter, I guess, Jane, is a very informal response, that it runs counter to the culture of support for the Clinton administration to mention these embarrassing matters prominently.
She said National Review.
Oh, someone up front said that you were addressing this comment to National Review. Why aren't they talking about this? I don't know. Let's ask Bill.
Let's suppose there is a system that would knock down all ICBMs. What would find and stop cruise missiles, which would be equipped with stealth technology?
Well, you're adding to the blackness of the day. They are a very serious problem. I know less about the technical problems, but they are comparable to those of defending against ballistic missiles, especially now with the ability to bootleg positional information from our satellites. And you were quite right, it's an added problem.
In the 1960s, I worked on anti-missile defense at Airjet General in Sacramento, and I'd like to discuss with you a little bit later some classified things.
Good.
I was just wondering if you, do you think that Russia...
You know, I might tell this gentleman who just departed that I stay on the, since I left the government, I've stayed on the unclassified side of the fence because I can then speak freely and never be worried about something I might be saying that's out of order. So we'll have to keep our conversation on that side. Yes?
Do you think Russia is more concerned with an attack from China as opposed to from us? Is that why they're building up?
I think...
And if so, do you see some kind of a scenario where we would still get pulled into a conflict between, a nuclear conflict between those two countries as Saddam Hussein tried to pull, you know, or split up the coalition by attacking Israel?
I think, on the contrary, that Russia and China are in the process of making common cause against their perceived hated enemy, the United States, which the Russians, by and large, blame for the present predicament they are in. And China is very hostile, as you may know if you have read that marvelous book by Monroe and Bernstein, Coming Conflict with China. Quotes in there demonstrate the Russian top levels of government are very hostile to the United States for allegedly interfering with their influence in the Asian sphere. No, I would say the other way around, that they're going to make common cause against us.
On a recent trip to Russia, I came across a interesting piece of information. I'm wondering if you comment on it or if you've heard on their Typhoon missile submarines. They used to have it that if they were underneath the polar ice cap, they were to make a rapid ascent and punch a launch hole for one missile with Comey power. But this information had it that they had developed with using two of the ICBM launch tubes. They had a polar ice cap penetration system that would blow a hole through the ice and would allow them to salvo. The hole was large enough that then they would move the submarine over to it on the launch command order, and they could salvo their missils. And,
yes.
I was wondering if I reported this to the CIA, but never got a callback or any interest response on it.
I do recall reading something about this. It adds further to the blackness of the situation.
It was very chilling to me because the people that it came from were quite credible and gave them some other aspects to the situation that was quite chilling.
Yes, it further worsens the problem, but the fundamental problem, in my opinion, which is the possibility of an accidental launch through malfunctions of the Soviet-Russian command and control system, or of a launch by a rogue officer with malice aforethought. Yes, sir.
Are you free to comment on reports that the United States has destroyed all its shorter range nuclear missiles?
You know, I'm not so well informed on that. Again, I have sources that you and I can both ask about it, but I can't give you an informed answer.
But if we're dependent on, I've heard, and I think if we're dependent on ICBMs, we're less likely to make credible threats to defend, say, our troops who might be fighting in the Middle East in case they are hit by limited nuclear attacks.
It's always, it seemed to me that the prime menace to our strategic interests in these situations, and especially in the theater, is a credible threat by a Saddam or a Gaddafi or whoever against our forces deployed in, let us say, the Middle East or in some region to prevent us from using our military power to keep order in the world. We would have had a very, it's often been said that the main lesson that the third world rogue nations derive from Desert Storm is don't start a conflict with the U.S. unless you have nuclear weapons. Sir?
Do I have the floor?
Oh, well, this gentleman has been trying to
Can't
get...
hear unless you lose the mic.
Oh, okay, my apologies.
Back in the late 50s and early 60s, I was a flight surgeon in the Navy. And I was stationed for a while at Point Magoo, just north of here. And one of my best friends was Jim Butterworth, who was the chief engineer for the Nike X program at the time. And I witnessed, I was a flight surgeon, so I had a good seat. I witnessed the launch of the first successful Nike X from there. It intercepted a missile from Kwajalein in the stratosphere and destroyed it, bullet to bullet. Whatever happened to that? It seemed to work just
What year was this?
This was 1960, 61.
Well, we had a promising technology in the 60s. The ABM treaty blew it away. That's my understanding.
How good is the Russian technology? I mean, if their footballs are 4 years out of date, how about their missiles and how accurate are they?
Well, I would say that the best brains they have go into that sector, and I wouldn't discount them. And we again, this is intelligence information. My impression on the other side of the fence is that we monitor the tests. They have very capable arsenal.
Could you comment on the possibility of a third-party rogue nation not launching an attack on either us or the USSR or China for that matter, but deliberately precipitating false information by launching a dummy missile so that 1, 2, or 3 of the parties would feel that they're under attack and therefore had to retaliate?
That's a very interesting suggestion, and it seems quite realistic to me.
Our satellite surveillance exchange with these other parties, is that close enough to address a problem of that sort? Is that a completely blank question?
We had, under the Bush administration, we had useful initiatives in progress towards that kind of cooperation, but my understanding is that this is no longer true, except for the one area of expanding the scope of the ABM treaty.
What would the Russians have to gain by changing their stated philosophy or their actual policy from no first use to abandonment of no first use, or changing from launch on confirmation to launch on warning? It seems to me, I don't understand this, because it seems to me it would put us in the situation of making the same kind of a change, which would be suicidal potentially, unless there's something else behind it.
The Russian concern is over their ability to continue to project an image and the reality of a world power in a circumstance in which their economy is in free fall, and their military forces are rapidly disintegrating, conventional forces. In a panel discussion that not a panel discussion, it was a series of meetings that we organized at the Marshall Institute in Washington. One of the gentlemen who was engaged in some bilateral discussions with his Russian counterparts said that they said to him, we are concerned that if we don't have a first-rate nuclear arsenal aimed at you, you will treat us at about the level of Bulgaria. They're very, very sensitive both on ego terms and harsh realities to what's happening to their superpower status. And they feel that only their nuclear power can protect them.
I've heard stories of Russian silos having a puddle of several feet of water in the bottom of them and not being properly maintained. And it was told to would rather not exercise up in space or whatever. We're not going to have a lot of discipline on the ground either. How great do you feel is the effectiveness of the Russian nuclear force? Is that sterling compared to the rest of it, where families live on board their guided missile frigates?
You just added to the anecdotal lore on the deterioration of the Russian system for protecting their accidental launch circumstance. And what you just mentioned seems entirely credible against the background of the information I read from this congressional testimony. I would say that there's no cause for optimism there. I thought you were implying perhaps that you felt this lack of effectiveness would prevent them from attacking us, but I would say that the danger on the other side of the coin is greater.
Right, well, I'm just saying that whatever the percentages, say that they push the button and 30 or 40% fail, or there was a chance of that. I'm looking for that percentage. I'm sure it either may be increasing or decreasing, but not that they have missiles in a single mad launch. We wouldn't still suffer greatly, but what would you...
No, wait, I'm puzzled. You say if 30 or 40% failed in a massive launch, we wouldn't suffer, but I think we would be wiped out.
The command post had a nut in it. He pushed the buttons. I don't know how many missiles he would have under control.
Oh, I see.
But I'm wondering if you could give me an idea how many missiles would fail to launch.
No, I can't. I mean, it's not that I won't, but I'm unable to. But the thought is interesting.
I just had a question on those treaties. You mentioned the ABM, like revising or updating it, and versus the START 2 or START 1, whatever, that some of it was not ratified by either Senate or Parliament of the new Russia. But my understanding, correct me if you have any studies that can change, but my information shows it's always been bilateral. We're reducing supposedly with Russia. Has there been do you have information that China, Pakistan, India, North Korea has been involved in any of these treaty talks?
Wait, I'm puzzled. No, they've been bilateral. Although so one of the things the Clinton administration seems prepared to agree to is to expand the number of Russian votes by including Belarus and Kazakhstan and the third one I've forgotten, Afghanistan. No, not Afghanistan. It slipped my mind. Oh, Ukraine. That's right. But these have been bilateral entirely, as far as I know.
Okay, so if we reduce, regardless of whether China's building up, we may cut back as far as your information.
That's right. That's right. That's quite right.
Yeah, these two. I read about
Sure.
China supplying Iran with nuclear weapons.
Yes.
And what do you have?
Well, missiles and missile technology. Yeah.
Do you have a comment on the Iranian thing?
More grim news. It seems confirmed that the Soviets are transferring missile technology and missiles to Iran. They've denied it, but the intelligence information is incontrovertible. Yes.
I remember when Jimmy Carter used to say we didn't need all of our missiles. One of our submarines would wipe out Russia, so we had nothing to worry about. How many submarines do they have with a full complement of nuclear weapons aimed at us?
I don't know those numbers, but Yeah, I can't tell you. We can find out. That's open information, but I haven't got that information.
But quite a few.
Yes, quite a few.